Hello everyone. Today we start our discussion on deep learning for computer vision, and we start with the introduction. Deep learning plays a very crucial role in computer vision today, and it all started roughly about 2012. The ImageNet challenge is one of the greatest challenges in computer vision, where the goal is to look at an image like the ones that are shown here and to recognize the object in the image. There are about 1,000 images, there are about 1,000 classes, and about 1,000,000 images that show various objects in different poses. So you can imagine that this is quite a difficult challenge for object recognition. For years on, researchers have worked on this challenge, trying to come up with algorithms that can push the boundaries and achieve state-of-the-art accuracy. In 2012, it was shown that a deep learning technique that was actually proposed at the end of 1990s achieved such a good accuracy that it halved the state-of-the-art at the time. And it was able to really recognize objects that are quite difficult to recognize. For example, in these cases, it was able to recognize that in this image that there is a mite. And if we were to, for instance, look at the other categories that the algorithm thought that it might be possible for this image, we see that they're all related to little insects. In this case, we see that it actually recognizes the container ship. And here, even though it's quite a complicated scene with human beings on it, and there are different cars and so on, it's able to recognize that the main object here is a motor scooter, and so on. It even is able to distinguish between a leopard and a jaguar and a cheetah, who are roughly, to be honest, quite similar, have quite similar fur and texture and color. So really, the algorithm achieved incredible results. Now, since 2012, there is a boom in research in computer vision and deep learning. Today, we're able to really do wonders with these algorithms. For instance, one example is creating the text that corresponds to the image. Now here we see, for example, 4 images. The text, the captions that are written beneath these images, believe it or not, are actually automatically written by a computer algorithm proposed by partI and Feifei in 2015. On the left-hand side, the algorithm looks at the image and automatically is able to write that there's a man in black shirt playing the guitar. In the second one, we see a construction worker in orange safety vest is working on the road. 2 young girls are playing with a Lego toy and so on. Now you see this is quite incredible. These are complicated scenes, and the algorithm is not able to recognize only what's happening in the image, but also put it in an English sentence that we're able to understand. Now, obviously, the sentence itself is rather descriptive than being a real caption that's written by a human being. But today, even these algorithms are getting better and better, and the most recent algorithms are able to write quite human-like captions for such images. Another great example why deep learning is such a big, important topic in computer vision is these images. These images are clearly what we see here is a dog, a set of islands, a butterfly, and a hamburger. These images, they don't actually exist. They are actually sampled from random noise, or more specifically, first a vector of random noise is sampled. Then an algorithm converts it into an image. It actually synthesizes an image that's realistic enough that when a human being looks at it, they're okay with that. These are really possible hamburgers and dogs and islands that can actually exist in reality. We're able to do even further things. We're able to, for instance, change the style of a picture into a photograph, or change a photograph into a painting that was made by, for example, Monet, or actually any of the artists any of the painters that you might like. It's able to change a scene that clearly is taken in summer and convert it to winter, and the winter and the summer, zebras into horses, and vice versa. So these algorithms underneath basically understands what's in the image, and it's able to change or synthesize new texture such that the new image is realistic and actually it makes sense. Today, deep learning, or in other words, multi-layered neural networks, is an essential tool in computer vision and image analysis. It's actually used for enhancement, detection, segmentation, recognition, depth estimation, and a lot more. And we'll basically see the basics and then talk about some applications in the coming weeks. We'll spend 5 weeks on deep learning. First week, today, we will talk about introduction to deep learning, to neural networks. We will see what the basics are. We will see how they're trained and how they're constructed. If you are familiar with deep learning methods, this lecture might be a bit repetitive for you, so you might want to skip it fast or even skip it completely if you're comfortable with it. Starting from next week, we will talk about convolutional neural networks, which is the fundamental technology behind computer vision today. And then we will talk about supervised learning applications, detection, segmentation in the third and the fourth week. The last week we'll dedicate to advanced topics, particularly unsupervised learning, and if time permits, recurrent neural networks. So let's start our discussion with the simple algorithms, with the simple notions. Machine learning is a very large set of tools, and there is a huge community of researchers behind developing these tools. In a nutshell, machine learning for visual perception is about discovering and leveraging visual patterns to do tasks that we're interested in. For example, in the images that are shown on the left-hand side, the task might be to recognize whether these scenes are taken from a road. And you see that even though there are quite a number of differences between these two images, there are some patterns that persist. There's a road, there are cars on the roads, there are some trees or buildings above the road, and there's a horizontal line that actually goes through the road and through the image in both of the cases. Now notice that these images are taken in different places, taken at different times of the day and even perhaps the season. However, the patterns exist, and these are the type of patterns that we kind of leverage to understand what's in the image. Now, these patterns can actually be a lot more difficult as well. For example, on the top right here, I'll show you 4 brain images taken from individuals with different age groups. So here we see a person who's 17 years old, 30 years old, 74 years old, and 81 years old. Now, these are different individuals, but notice that the brain images of the older individuals are somewhat different than the younger individuals. Actually, we see that these holes, which I call the ventricles, are much larger, and furthermore, these areas are much denser in the brain of a young person compared to an old person. That's natural because as we get older, we lose our brain tissue, and that actually shows up in the images. And that's a visual pattern that we can use to estimate the age of a person, for instance, from their brain image. Now, obviously, these patterns can be quite complicated as well. I mean, look at the cat and dog images right here. This is basically probably the simplest machine learning task that one can imagine, or it looks like it. Actually, it's not that simple because even when we talk about cats, there's so much variation in the images. The types of cats, the pose, the illumination, the variations, the size. And this is what actually makes it quite difficult. Now, there are patterns that persist in these images that actually makes a cat and a dog a dog. And as human beings, we're able to visualize these patterns and then leverage them to do the task. It's not really that we know what we're doing. If someone asks us to explain why we call this image a cat, we can probably do it. But internally, a mechanism in our brain works and already assigns to this image the fact that there are cats in it and this image that there are dogs in it. So the idea about the machine learning is really creating algorithms that can identify these patterns and leverage them for certain tasks. So it's like a discovering and leveraging patterns. And we do this by really showing lots of examples to the algorithms. So we show the algorithms lots of examples, for instance, of the brain images that are taken from young people and old people. And we tell the algorithm that this is the brain of an old person, this is the brain of a young person for each of these examples. So when we train the algorithm, basically when we tune its parameters by showing lots of examples, now we can actually use the algorithm to answer the question for a new common image. So once we have this image, which is not seen by the algorithm yet, the algorithm actually can look at it, can identify the patterns, and tell us how old is she. So the predictions are based on visual patterns, and algorithms that can determine useful patterns like shape, texture, size, and constellation objects are quite useful. And by useful, what do I mean? Is that it helps us accomplish tasks. In this case, for example, it tells how old this person is. In the previous examples, it could tell whether there are cats or dogs in that image. And while doing so, notice that there's quite a bit of variability between these images as well. If I look at, for example, the images of the old people, the brain images, you see that these folds of the brain are not quite alike between two individuals. So there is a variability. So a successful algorithm actually ignores the unrelated variation, and this can be pose, elimination, contrast, that's unrelated to the task itself, ignoring it and only focusing on the variation that helps it perform the task. So in this cases, for instance, an algorithm might be just looking at the size of these structures in deciding how old the person is. There are really two main types of learning. One of them is supervised, where there's a task. It can be a segmentation, detection, and recognition. And we show the algorithm lots of examples that have both the features, or in that case, the images, and the corresponding labels. When we talk about, for example, the segmentation task, we show the algorithm the images and the pixel-wise labeling of the image itself. At prediction time, we only have the image itself. We don't have the label. And we try to estimate the labels for that image. Now, looking at the example task, again, there's quite a large appearance variation across classes, and the algorithm is supposed to leverage these things and ignore the variance within the classes in the same task. For example, in this image here, we see that there are two cars that are quite different visually. But the goal of the algorithm is to recognize that they're both cars, so identify similar patterns in these, and assign car label to each of them. Likewise, here you have several human beings. They are quite different, their clothes are different. The algorithm is supposed to ignore those variations and focus on the fact that these are human beings and they're different from the pavement, from the road, from the poles, and from the building and the tree. And in these cases, the examples are extremely important. The better the examples you show to the algorithm, the better the algorithm will perform. The second type of learning is what's called unsupervised learning. And here we don't really have a task at hand. Instead, we have lots of data, and we want to model, represent, or describe the variability within the data. And we've already seen this with the PCA model, remember? We wanted to understand, for example, what are the first modes of variations in the shapes of the human faces in 3D. The goal really was to explain the variability, or to basically represent the distribution of the data sets. So as I said, there is no specific task. And we show the algorithm examples, but this time examples only have images. They don't really have any labels. So it's only the features that we show. And you might ask yourself, so why is the unsupervised learning useful? And we've already seen part of it. Remember, we basically took a 2D image of a painter Van Dyck and created a 3D representation out of it. So they're quite useful. In the more abstract sense, they're quite useful for prior information, and they're used as a regularizer for a variety of inverse problems in image analysis. And this can be the 3D reconstruction, it can be deconvolution, super resolution, or noise removal. Now, in these lectures, at least in the first 4 weeks, we will only talk about the supervised learning, partly because it's one of the workhorse in modern computer vision. And I believe it's quite essential for you as computer vision students to have a good grasp of supervised learning. Unsupervised learning is a bit more complicated. We'll see it at the end in the 5th week, but it's more of an advanced topic. Before we start with the mathematical basis, I will stop the video and upload it, and I will start with mathematical basis in the next part.